Good morning. I'm Norm Hill, and we're right here in the center of Nashville, Tennessee, at the site of Fort Negley. Fort Negley is a European-built style fort built during 1862, almost in the center of the city of Nashville. Many people don't realize that it's here, and thousands of people drive by every day, not recognizing what a true value and a prize that the city has. Now, this fort and a ring of forts, or basically a ring of fire, was built around the city of Nashville in the early 1862, after Fort Donelson fell, after the battles of Shiloh, in which the federal forces came into the city and had to fortify it and support it in order to retain it. Nashville being a very key city along the waterways, the Cumberland River running off to our right here. Now, Fort Negley is particularly significant to the African American population, just for its significance that this fort and many of the forts built around this and fortifications were built by conscripted labor. And meaning that is that during the war, as slaves escaped from their slavery and from their imprisonment, they went into Union lines and were considered contraband of war. But also, in fact, there were many free blacks in the city. The need for fortifications and building was so great that federal troops would go into these African American neighborhoods and in these communities and actually conscript them from their churches, from their businesses, and oppress them, like the old press gangs from the military, and put them at work on these forts. They were lined up in work gangs, put in regiments, as it were, and built the walls, the emplacements, all of the gun emplacements were put together here by black people, many of them not of their own willing and their own accord. It was so convenient at the time that the Union Army basically put them into the service in the same work gangs and in the same regiments that they worked in to begin with.
Okay, we're also here, just another site here at the site of Fort Negley here in Nashville, Tennessee. And I'm going to show you a little bit of the breastworks and the outer works of this fort. As you can see, some of it is it's crumbling, but the fortifications that you see here are built upon the original foundation that was built by black soldiers and black conscripted labor during the Civil War. Many of this was done so well, and the artisanship was so well, that these foundations are still here and can be further built upon and brought upon in the future. Now we're looking out to the south here, and as you can see, off to my right, you may see a tower and a flat spot here. This is Fort Casino, which was also part of that ring of fire that was around Nashville as a protective barrier to an assault from the south by Hood's troops that would come up from the Battle of Franklin and Spring Hill. This particular fort had never come under direct attack, but it did fire the first shots of the Battle of Nashville and providing supportive fire for black troops and other troops as they went into battle against Hood's troops. As you'll see, some of the hills that you look beyond here, all of these hills were heavily fortified. They were denuded of lumber, of trees to form a complete field of fire, so that a person could see almost to Brentwood from here and form a clear field of fire. As you can also see, there was quite a bit of room up here. There were very heavy Parrott guns were in here, heavily fired emplacements. They could fire support for all of the troops that were in battle and pushing the Confederates back. Now, on the first day of the battle, there were two scenarios here, because from the south here, the black troops assaulted under Steedman's corps, assaulted the rebel forces and were pushed back in such a demonstration so strong that the Confederates felt that this was the initial assault, and they trained many of their guns directly on them. In fact, the black troops walked into almost an ambush at that side, but they persisted and went so vigorously that Hood's troops thought, well, this must be the main thrust of attack. When in fact, the real arm of attack came from my right over these hills, as you see here, and which there was a use of Union cavalry equipped with the 7-shot repeating Spencer weapons, and moved rapidly around the flanks and actually crumbled and thrust into the Confederate lines, pushing them back to the second day, all the way back almost to Brentwood. And from there, the second battle began, second day of the battle began, and when they hit Brentwood, Shies Hill was a holdout, redoubts number 1, 2, and 3 were holdouts, and as each one of them fell, the Confederate forces pushed further and further back until they broke and ran. And this was the first time that a Confederate army had actually broken and ran in the face of battle. This was quite a disaster for the Confederate troops at this particular time, and one of the major ending battles of the Civil War right here in Nashville. Well, here we are at Fort Negley, here on the anniversary of the Battle of Nashville, and we're at the inner works of this particular fortification. Now again, this is a European-style star fort that was used for artillery emplacements during the Civil War and the Battle of Nashville. Now, it's interesting because you can see over my shoulder here downtown Nashville, and you can see the buildings in the background. Those buildings, of course, didn't exist during the war, but this is how close we were to downtown Nashville. The purpose of this fort is such a high ground that they could get good visibility and good clear field of fire for its own protection. These forts were designed with what's called breastworks, and each one they would fall back into these breastworks as it was, if one part of the fort was taken, they could fall back and back. They were called breastworks because they fell just about chest high to these soldiers and they could fire over them. The internal side of this fort was the magazine, the powder magazines. And you will see some of these buildings, some of these areas here which actually protected the true powder emplacements. If the powder magazine went up, the whole fort would go up. And they protected that to the last man. But again, this fort never really came under direct assault, direct attack, and it is still preserved here, waiting for restoration and waiting for the interest of the American public, and particularly those who are interested in preserving our history and culture here in Middle Tennessee. Here we are at the site of Fort Negley on top of a beautiful hill. Now, prior to the Civil War, this location was a park. It was a place where people came on a Sunday afternoon to catch the cool breezes that cool us off in our southern hemisphere here, and it was a lovely location. It was also picked as a location by the Union troops and Union forces to build this particular fortification, its protection. Now, to give you some perspective, straight behind me here, we're looking at Fort Casino, and behind it, Shies Hill. And to the right of the Union Works. To my left here would be the left of the Union Works, and to the south, pointing towards Brentwood and where the Confederate troops under Hood were all embanked in this area. Behind me, you can see downtown Nashville, and you can see how close we are. All of this protecting it, and beyond Nashville, as you can see, is the Cumberland River, which was a main thoroughfare at that particular time for goods and services and certainly ammunition that supplied and was protected by this particular fort and the series of forts around Nashville that protected it during the war. Okay, this is Norm Hill again, and we're standing here at some of the inner walls and inner protective gates of Fort Negley. Now, as you can see, these fortifications were built to withstand assaults from the outside. This particular gate was to be narrowed down any assault. If the outside breastworks fell, then the enemy would have to come through these walls in a narrow gate in order to get to the intersections of the fort and into the magazine and into the supplies that were inside this fort. As you can see, the defenders of the fort could stand on the higher ground, fire down on them, give each other covering fire. These forts were designed to self-protect, and each time they were assaulted the outer ranks, they would fall back, come through this gate. There are other gates you might see on the inside which would be protected at each level of the battle. Hopefully, it never got to this point when it went into battle. But if it was, this is the design ingeniously built to be self-protective. Well, we have President Abraham Lincoln with us today. Mr. Lincoln, Mr. President, we're glad to have you here, sir.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And I thought I would like to explain to you a little bit what had happened here, which was in denial of your orders to attack. We were in General Thomas's army during the Battle of Nashville, and I know that you had constantly urged him to assault and go against the Confederate forces that were attacking Nashville. And I know you were impatient about it, much as you were with General McClellan. But sir, there was a reason that General Thomas did not attack as he did. There was a major ice storm here, sir. And then during that ice storm, nothing could move. And so General Thomas began to set his battle plans in place here for to attack as soon as this weather lifted. What many people didn't realize, sir, is that order that you sent to relieve General Thomas of his command was actually delayed in Washington and never delivered until after the battle had begun. Sir, we had won the first day's battle before General Thomas learned that he was to be relieved of his command. And when you learned about it, you rescinded the order, and no one was mad at anyone after that. As a matter of fact, I was there when the letter came, when the commendation came from you to General Thomas, in which you said, go forth with and attack the enemy. You have an excellent opportunity to put this to rest at this point. And sir, it wasn't easy, but we went forth and put them at a rout. Okay. Sir, what were you thinking about General Thomas at the time that he would not move?
You have to understand.
Yes, sir.
Pressure.
Yes, sir.
Pressure. All of the people in the North, all of my advisors, pressure, go forward, go forward. It's well that Thomas used his own initiative. Sometimes we politicians tend to meddle in military matters when we're not military people, and I certainly have dabbled more than I should have.
Well, it's wonderful that, because it did work out to the good. It could have went either way, but at that point in time, the general was well aware of the situation. He was quite pleased with it. In fact, sir, after the first day's battle, General Thomas went out onto the battlefield right here just south of us here, and he saw all of the members of the United States colored troops and the bodies that were in the forefront of the battle in the breastworks, and he was quoted as saying, this establishes the manhood of the Negro race. This proves it once and for all that the Negro will fight. And so we were quite proud of that.
And I am so thankful and so grateful that we had such brave men that gave up their lives for what they believed in. You know, I've taken an awful lot of criticism for the Emancipation Proclamation. Some folks said that it didn't really free any slaves, and in truth, I suppose that they are right, that it didn't free many slaves. As bad as I hate to admit it, we had slaves in the North and in the border states. Why, in my own home state of Kentucky alone, there were more than 250,000 slaves in bondage, and they would have to wait 2 more years for the passage of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution to gain their freedom. But the Emancipation Proclamation, if it didn't do anything else, it made it possible for almost 200,000 black soldiers to join the Union Army. And sir, I know today that without their help, the war could have gone on and on and on.
We are so happy, sir, that you yielded and you understood the cry from Frederick Douglass that we cannot fight this battle with your free black hand behind your back. And you finally unleashed that hand and went forth to win this war. And for that, sir, we are eternally grateful.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
May God bless.
Thank you.
Move in a little closer. For me, I think this would be one of the great spots for the interpretation for the Battle of Nashville, here in Traveler's Rest. I think would be the 2 key spots. And all these stone, these are not original. These were rebuilt as an outer covering for by the WPA in the 1930s. And it was well taken care of in the 30s, 40s, 50s. Even as a little boy, the 60s, it still looked okay. My mama brought me out here, and I was a tiny, tiny boy.
but underneath these stones, inside these stones, still are the original foundations of the fort. And it was named for a Union general, James S. Negley, I believe is his name. And they later renamed this fort after this battle, another name, because Negley got a lot of hot water for corruption. It even made veteran politicians aghast at the corruption of Negley. And that probably is saying a whole lot, I might add. But nonetheless, during the war, heavy guns are inside this fort, obviously facing south, but also facing toward the city, toward Nashville. If it was attacked, they were going to just blow the city all to Kingdom Come as well. USCTs were in this fort during the war, 14th, 16th USCTs, among others. Now, someone asked during the battle who was in this fort. That's a good question. That's hard to answer. I know there were 32-pounders and heavy artillery units inside the fort. I think that they stripped this fort, most of the men, of course, for the battle. That's what I feel. A friend of mine in the 70s found a Confederate belt buckle inside this fort. They were taking prisoners and marching them toward this area. And I think it's just common sense to think that they held prisoners inside this fort as well, inside the fort. It's from the air, you can see it is a semi-star fort in a way, not completely a star fort. And as we already noted, there's be Fort Casino, Fort Houston, I believe would be behind, and then on down the line, you'll see on your map showing all the different forts. And a wonderful view. Someone asked, where's Shies Hill? This is Laurel Ridge, the big ridge right there. And I believe Shies Hill would be right in the distance over there, barely visible. Real hazy today. But guns from these forts could fire, and I don't mean, but don't you think 32-pounders could fire farther than 2 miles?
I would think so.
Yeah, because a 3-inch Hotchkiss, Hotchkiss 3-inch rifle could fire about a mile and a half, a mile easy. Hit up top of the flour barrel.
Gun, so they're made for
Napoleon's go about 900 yards. So I think a 32-pounder could go about 4 miles. That's why they wouldn't let the Confederates have campfires. Didn't want them to have campfires. So they could fire a long way, 32-pounders.
Could they hit Shy Hill from here?
I don't believe they could hit Shies Hill. That's farther than about 4 miles as a crow flies. But for that outer perimeter of the Confederate defense, the entrenchments up to the first day, now that was closer, and they could hit them at that distance. Very much so. Very much so.
Thomas?
Yes, sir.
Judge John Overton owned this property.
He owned this property?
And the first shot on the 15th was fired from here in the direction of his plantation.
Did it hit anywhere close?
No.
Okay.
But you could see from the upper gallery on Traveler's Rest, you could see this direction.
Actually, it wasn't Judge Overton at the time. It was his
The judge, no, not the
granddaughter.
colonel.
The granddaughter of this woman. She lived in Memphis. Actually, she was deceased.
Well, of course, Judge Overton is dead as well.
Did they tell you the story in Traveler's Rest about after the war when Grover Cleveland visited Traveler's Rest? Of course, Miss Overton was there. Grover Cleveland, president, visited, I believe he was president then, but visited Traveler's Rest, and she had a Confederate flag there. He said, "What is that flag?" She said, "That's the flag of my country." And she had a cannonball, and she said, picked up the cannonball. She said, "You sent this to us hot, I'll give it back to you cold." There, as I told my bus, just recently in the newspapers, they're having discussions now about working on this and making this an interpretive center. I think it'd be fabulous, just fabulous. And tourism dollars bring a lot of money, and they come and they go, and they just leave their money, and they're great friends too. Where's Ross?
Ross went down underneath. He'll be back in a second. Anything else,
Now,
Thomas?
archaeology was performed by Fred Prouty and them back in the about 8 years ago, and working in this area, and they found areas, where canteens, And they found a lot of artifacts. So there's still an abundance of artifacts in this fort where a lot of archaeology can still be done. And they can portray a lot of things about the Battle of Nashville, as well as the USCTs, a whole lot of different things, and the city of Nashville as well, what happened during the war. Nashville itself, called the Athens of the South, had publishing companies and a lot of churches, and it was had gas lights, and it was a very modern city. And after the occupation, of course, all the fathers, the politicians, and the leading fathers were put in jail, including General Cheatham's family was here. Now, what's going on in General Cheatham's mind as his family is in this area? Ross, if you like to pick up.
I don't know what you've said. So
Well, just something about
Where were you?
A little bit about the fort and about Shies Hill. Where's Shies Hill? That's Laurel Woods there.
That flagpole down there is
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
It's about that big. It's really tiny when you look out there. And it's hard
Right
to
in this
see.
direction, to the left of Laurel Ridge.
Peach Orchard Hill.
I think from where you are, there's a tree branch in the way.
Let me get this shot.
You step back.
Surprised there aren't cell phone towers up here then.
This is the first time I've been up here since the Texas flag has been up at the Lunette. And I'm trying, maybe somebody can help me. I'm trying to see the Texas flag so we can see where the Lunette, where we just came from, is. And I know it's that direction, but I've never had this opportunity to try and find it.
There were some Confederate prisoners being taken back to the USCTs were guarding them. And these South Carolinians, I believe I know the Confederates, South Carolinians asked General Thomas personally, we'd rather die than be guarded and have guards of blacks over us. He said, well, go on and make plans for your burial, because I don't have any troops to guard you beside them. So they guarded them, and they took them on in.
Who built this fort?
The Federal Army, of course. They started in 1862 after the occupation. Started building the fort. 62, big time in 63. And to guard the approaches to the south as well as guard the city. And they would reduce the city if they had to, if it was captured. Ma'am?
I kind of know where that is.
Well, the walls were built by Dick.
This WPA, they
It may
built
be
these
right.
walls.
You just said
But,
maybe
They have walls.
They did have walls, but it was crumbling, and the WPA built these walls over to protect them.
Thomas, did you tell them about the picture with the U.S. cannon pointed toward the city?
I told them about the cannons pointing toward the city, but not the picture.
They've often tried to claim they were protecting Nashville. Actually, they were holding it hostage, because there's a picture that surfaced a few years ago, it got in the newspaper. But right over there where the buses parked, sort of that way, a large cannon pointed at Nashville. If they'd had to give it up, they'd have blown the city to pieces. If you think about where the Performing Arts Center is, right about that corner, there's a lady named Rachel Carter Craighead. I mentioned her earlier. They'd come and get their servants and bring them out to build these fortifications and bring them back at night. And she described how this looked with all the lights on the hills at night, how interesting it was to see it. But where she would sit in her parlor, she'd look right up, I guess it's 6th, at the state capitol, and there were cannon pointed at her parlor. So that's what it was like living in Nashville. You can't hardly imagine. Think about being in your living room for a moment, and you look out the window and there's cannon pointing at your house. But that's the conditions they lived under. People were being put in prison and forced to take oaths, and a lot of people took oaths of allegiance that didn't mean it. But if your choice was to die or to take the oath, you were likely to take the oath. Rachel's father was a bank president, and they came and hauled him away. She thought he was going to die. He was apparently old enough that he was a little feeble, and he decided to take the oath because he felt that his first responsibility wasn't to the state or the Confederacy, but to his bank depositors. He felt that the bank really needed him back. And whether you like his argument or not, that was how he felt. And if we were that old and we thought we were going to die in prison for no good reason, we might have taken the oath if we were. spoke to veterans. What was your question?
What you call kicking the tires?
Kicking the tires.
You're too young.
I guess I'm.
You're too young.
Ross, can you point out, can you see Love Circle?
That's a good question because we're going to go to Love Circle. I think I'm looking at the tower that's on it. Let me think if that isn't it. No, that's Lawrence Hill.
Over there by Vanderbilt. You remember where it's looking over there by Vandy?
We sure ought to be able to see it.
It's near West End Avenue.
When you're there's a tower on Love Circle, and if we can see it here, that would be an interesting thing. I'm glad David Curry asked. I think the hill here may be too tall that it's blocking it out, but we'll look back this way when we
It's those buildings there, right behind those buildings, because I remember when we were up there shooting it, those buildings were in the way, shooting this way.
He's got a good point now. Oh, I see it now. I see Love Circle now. Okay. I don't know if I can point to it, but if you look straight across several hundred yards, you'll see a lot of tall light poles, which I believe is a baseball field and a public
crane,
school.
you see the crane? That tower
look
right
toward
behind
the
it's
crane.
Love.
Where all those lights are was Fort Morton, one of the forts that covered the pikes. And in the distance, if you've got good eyesight, you may see a tower, which I've always thought looked like the Eiffel Tower. And that's Love Circle on the west end. And that's part of the fortified line that goes all around the city. And we're going to go there in a little while. And we're going to walk around up there and see the whole battlefield almost, it'll seem.